So welcome to this fabulous opportunity where Thoughtworks and Team Topologies are coming together. We're all in our own time zones. It's a global world. We got Matthew, who's in the UK at 7 a.m. in the morning, and so huge thank you. I think everyone, Matthew's so well known. We all think we know him, but actually not that many people have had the chance to chat with him, and we're loving the fact that Team Topologies are leaning into being a big part of Australian life, bit of activity. And then we've got that very gentleman himself, Luke McManus, down the bottom there. He is the regional Team Topologies polymath, is how I would describe him. Definitely a renaissance man of organizations, engineering, and all other things. And what a great thing it is for Team Topologies to have someone flying the flag down here. And my other key guests here, I have Lee Saffin, who's my colleague at Thoughtworks, who's going to help us through, if Matthew's the elder, experienced, got dirt under his fingernails, author. Lee's very much, we send him to the front line. He has really got some tremendous customer stories to tell us today. So in 7 slides or so, we're going to attempt to cover the entire field of this crossover between Thoughtworks work and the world of Team Topologies, and the world of complex adaptive systems theory, the world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Technology, one of our wiser teammates at Thoughtworks often says, technology is not the constraint. Your organization probably is, though. And that's where we're going to go tonight. So quick logistics, this is being recorded, so we're seeing your names, those kind of things. If you don't want that, you think you can participate anonymously. We'll have Q&A running, time for questions at the end, chat amongst yourselves. Down under, we always do an acknowledgement of country, just a quick one, because Matthew's, I'm not sure the First Nation peoples of the United Kingdom, who exactly they are, the Druids or otherwise. But here in New Zealand, I'm sitting on the lands of the Ngāti Kahungunu, here in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, who arrived here in the 1500s. Lee's sitting in the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in downtown Melbourne. And I'm guessing Luke's not far away from that. And I love acknowledging First Nations people and what they can teach us. And in this case, what they can teach us about flow and holistic thinking. Because if you went back into those playbooks, Australia, 60,000 years of thinking like that, it's quite remarkable thinking about the whole realm and the flow and what that brings us in terms of resilience. It also flowed through into Buddhism and in Japan. So, the sequence of things, guardianship, elegance, balance, connection, ecosystem are all terms very familiar with those sets of beliefs, those groups of people who've been on this planet a very long time, and we acknowledge them, past, present, their leaders, and anyone emerging or on the call today. So 2 key people today see a lot of that holistic connectedness, our 2 key guests, wherever they look. I don't think it's possible for them to see an uncomplex view of most of the things. That's a special skill. And the problems that result from that are their work. They're both, Matthew Skelton and Lee Saffin, love a gnarly problem. They love to unravel and they love to improve situations. So, Matthew, that's it from me. I'd love to hand over to you. There might be one person on this call who doesn't know you. And so here you are in Australia. Here's a chance. We're in the region, as we've got Southeast Asia on the line as well. Tell us a little bit about it, and then don't forget to answer my question about why have we got CFOs and COOs on the header tonight?
Thanks, Nigel, and hi everyone. It's good to be here. I'm actually hoping to be in the region, in your part of the world next year, 2025. Let's see what happens. For now, this is the best I can do. So my name is Matthew Skelton, and I'm most known these days for being a co-author of the book Team Topologies. The subtitle is Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. Now, this comes out of work that I've been doing for a long time, really, way back to like 2013 and before, thinking about helping organizations to become more effective at the time, I was working in the context of delivering software with continuous delivery and techniques like that. But then we did some work with a whole bunch of organizations and kind of expanded some early work that we did. And we're really thinking, well, there's some principles and language and a thinking model effectively that's really needed in this kind of space. And that's some of what we're going to cover today. I mean, really, today's session kind of expands on and goes beyond what's in the Team Topologies book from 2019, in the sense that we've been working with lots of organizations since that book was published. It's nearly 5 years ago now since it was published. So we've been learning a lot about these kind of ideas around flow and around effective organizations and that kind of thing. And I think there's something to mention here, which is, yes, organizations are complex adaptive systems. And so, in other words, there's multiple agents with different agendas and different intention, and that's where the complexity in behavior emerges. That's partly what Team Topologies tries to address with some of the language and principles in there. It helps us navigate that better. But I think there's an important point here, which is that we shouldn't confuse complexity in that sense, as in emergent behavior. We shouldn't confuse that kind of complexity with, oh, well, let's just deal with everything being really tangled. Because part of navigating the complexity is in putting in place some guardrails. Technically, they're called constraints, but kind of guardrails to say, hey, if we constrain the behavior in this thing, this system, to be like this, then we're able to work with it better. And that's part of what we're talking about here in the session today. And that's ultimately why it speaks to the CFO and COO roles inside an organization, so financial and operating, because the way in which many organizations, maybe most organizations, are run and financed these days doesn't work well with moving towards a flow-based approach. And the problem there is that the underlying operating principles and funding principles inside many organizations go back, many hundreds of years, when there was no digital. There's nothing like that at all, and the speed of information was the speed at which you could speak to large numbers of people. Whereas now, obviously, the speed of information flow can be way, way, way higher, and we can make decisions based on that. We can automate a bunch of stuff on top of it using digital technology. And there's a need for rethinking how these organizations kind of work and are funded. And that's what we're going to try and explore today.
So I think fun fact, if we had a quiz for the audience right now, and that quiz question would be, tell me one thing that the book Team Topologies was not, I would hope someone would answer the recipe for faster delivery and getting more out of the people. Because I'd hope they would say it was a shorter time to customer value, which you've done so much work to emphasize since. But a lot of people didn't get past the halfway mark in the book, and a lot of mythologizing around Team Topologies has left it in that zone, which we'll come back to, because I know you're super passionate. We may even get a bit of an insight tonight about what the next edition in the Team Topology series might be focusing on in perhaps 2025. So that's a great intro. Lee, you different background to Matthew, of course. Matthew's got an astonishing LinkedIn profile, if you haven't seen it. What's yours? And I know you because you're our on-the-ground observer, changer, worker, incredibly busy and devoted person. Tell us how you came to Thoughtworks and what are you working on that's going to fit into this talk tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Matt and Nige, everyone for joining. I'm super excited for the chat. My name is Lee Saffin. I'm a senior advisory consultant here at Thoughtworks, and I made my way to Thoughtworks via a little bit of a different path. So I was in accounting and corporate law for a short stint before coming into Thoughtworks. And I've been quite fortunate, as Nigel mentioned, I've gotten to sit on both sides of the table since being here. So getting to sit in the strategy room, see how a transformation is thought about, planned, and executed and communicated out to the org. But then, to Nigel's point, I've gotten to sit on the ground with the teams every day for the past, almost half a decade now, and see what the pitfalls are when you actually roll out a transformation. So seeing the success factors that go into a successful transformation, and the things that help drive a transformation, but also the things that absolutely derail them. And we know from a whole bunch of research that's out there that over 70% of transformations tend to fail. And so seeing the things that actually cause that is quite different depending on the side of the fence that you're sitting on. So yeah, super excited for the chat today and to share some of the things that I've spent working on over the last little while in a number of industries, both here in Australia and globally as well.
So in a nutshell, Lee, so you're a practitioner, you're a frontline person collecting stories and trying to make a difference. What drives you crazy about transformations? What's the number one thing you just go, can we never do that again?
Well, we'd probably sit here all day and talk about it, right? I think the communication of a transformation, but also misaligned objectives and misaligned work. I think you mentioned it, Nigel, in your intro, that technology is rarely the constraint to your organization. It's oftentimes your operating model. Yet it's very easy and very quick for us to go and blame technology as the reason for that or our lack of. So I think I could say this almost for every client that I've been in over the past however long, is that once we dig under the hood, every conversation that we end up having, the problem could be solved by adapting your operating model and focusing on fast flow, not through a technology solution, which oftentimes is what we're brought in to look at. And so, yes, so I think the thing for me is that we spend so much time talking about things that aren't actually the root cause of the problem. And it's wildly frustrating when you're having the same conversation with the fifth client, knowing that you've done it before. So it's the stuff that I think we probably want to talk about a little bit today as well, and taking a holistic view to transformation and understanding the different levers that you can pull, but also understanding that everything is interconnected. So focusing just on a delivery model isn't actually going to solve for the problem if you have a funding model that isn't pretty tightly coupled and aligned. So I think it's taking that holistic view to transformation. Oftentimes we don't do, and we try to do it in silos.
Okay, well, let's drop you directly as my first victim with a slide tonight into the world you've come from recently. So let's talk about operating models and what are they and how. I mean, we use this term very glibly at Thoughtworks, but not everyone uses the term. What's the essence of an operating model?
Yep. So I think it's a good point. Absolutely, there is a different version of operating model depending on who you speak to. For us, what we've tried to do and what you'll see on the right-hand side there is talk about what we've created, the Simplified Operating Model, which essentially is from executive to developer. How is work born, decided, and done from a holistic view across your organization? I think not addressing it as anything but that is the fastest way to short circuit it and get a suboptimal result. So something that we're seeing in a lot of organizations is that they're struggling with that. How is work born? How is it decided? And how is it done? And there's probably four things that I think, regardless of industry, that organizations are struggling with. So the first one, quite obviously, and we're seeing this around the world at the minute, is managing short-term constraints and focuses, typically financial, with executing on the strategy and continuing to invest in our long-term projects or our long-term objectives. Second one is, once we've actually figured that out and thought about it, how are we aligning the work that we're doing to our strategy? And we can think of countless examples that we've experienced where we've gone into an executive room and they've said, is there anyone in the organization that's working on anything remotely close to what our strategy says? And having no visibility or no understanding of what the work is actually set out to achieve. Equally, we can see on the other side of the table, teams sitting there going, I have no idea how the thing I'm working on today has any alignment to, for one, our strategy, but for two, is adding any value to the customer or the customers that we have. And so there's this huge gap that we're seeing in a lot of our clients when it comes to what are you trying to work on and what are you actually working on? What's taking up the majority of your team's time? So regardless of how quickly you can deliver it, are you actually delivering on the right thing in the first place?
Right. And so with this diagram, that's the start, isn't it? That's the leap of faith we ask people to make, that customers are a good starting place.
Absolutely. And so if we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, you've got that on the inside. So we want to go inside to outside from this spiral. And we want to think about, firstly, what is the customer actually asking for? What is our customer looking for? And how do we deliver on that? And how do we come up with a series of outcomes to go and deliver on that? I think a lot of organizations typically, there's varying results, but they're pretty good at this. The words on a page will say the right things, but that's typically where things fall down. So through the simplified operating model, what we want to look at from there is how would you know that that's true? And that's section number 2. So rather than jumping from outcome to work, we want to say what would tell us that we're actually progressing this. And once we know that, let's design work to move that measure. And let's track that work so that when we can understand that when it's not moving that measure, we can pivot away from it. From there, once we're really clear on the work that we need to do and want to do, we can then start to think about the skills that are required to actually execute that work. And within that, we can start to think about capability gaps or capability gap analysis, things like that, to say, okay, can we actually execute on the work that we know we need to do? And from there, how do we actually design teams to get that stuff out the door as efficiently and as quickly as possible? What we see...
Yeah. Talk about the anti-pattern now.
Yeah, so what we see and the pitfall of it is typically organizations go the other way. So when you have a project funding model, typically what teams will do is sit there and say, what are the skills that we have in our current teams? Our teams are siloed to begin with and quite functional. What are the skills that we have? Therefore, what work can we get those people to do to make sure that, for one, we can keep our head count, but that they're busy for the year. From there, we design work to fit the team. We measure the work retrospectively, and then we try to fit that back into the strategy at the end of the year. When realistically, a lot of the time, especially with project funding, and this is why we talk about that interconnectedness, is that if you're funding a project, if you are funding a project, typically the 2 measures are, was it delivered on time and was it delivered on budget? So the customer value is lost from the outset. And I think that's typically the biggest pitfall that we see, is going through this spiral backwards. And that's the norm for many of the organizations that we go into.
Right. Okay, so let's take that and I think let's pass to Matthew to talk about customer value and how does the Team Topologies philosophy, mindset, and toolkit start to weave into that world, Matt?
Thanks. So one of the things that we've been doing in the last few years since the Team Topologies book was published, I mean, to be honest, we're doing that before then, but particularly since then, is to really try to get under the, like, inside the machine, if you like, inside the mental machine and the actual operational machine of how many organizations actually work, and what are the underlying assumptions that people in organizations have in terms of how they set up work. How does the work work? And one of the surprising things for me has been the extent to which people in organizations believe that they have to coordinate things in order to get things done. And if you think about it, it's kind of understandable, because at a small scale, let's coordinate something. Let's say you're running a children's party. You've got 20 kids inside some space somewhere, party room or something like this, and you need to coordinate things. You need to bring things together. You need to make sure the food is there. You need to make sure the music is going to be ready. You need to make sure whatever it is, all that stuff. And you've coordinated that the party's happened. 20 kids have gone home with a party bag or whatever it is full of cake, and all is good. And you don't need to worry about that anymore. Great. That's a good situation to use for a project-based delivery, because there is no ongoing need to think about that children's party after it's finished, which is awesome. But also, there's value in coordinating stuff at that small scale. The problem is when you start to take that kind of gut feeling, kind of common sense approach into a large organization, or even a relatively small organization, as soon as you've got more than about 30, 50 people, then you get coordination challenges. And then there's this kind of common sense idea that, well, we need to coordinate things. We need to bring this thing together with this thing and this thing and this thing, get them all together and get them out the door at the same time. And it turns out that common sense approach of, well, let's coordinate it all, let's make sure it's all there, synchronized in time, is incredibly inefficient in terms of flow, and therefore incredibly inefficient financially. And there's there's a great talk from Fast Flow Conference 2023. It's shown in the slide right now. It's from JP Morgan, how JP Morgan applied Team Topologies to improve flow in a market-leading enterprise platform. After this webinar, you can go and have a look on YouTube. But the key thing here is that they looked at their current delivery dependencies and they mapped it out. There's a diagram, the kind of diagram on the left shows a whole kind of red spider diagram of dependencies. And these are dependencies during delivery in the sense that this team is waiting on this team to do something, but this second team is waiting on a third team and a fourth team to do something else before we can get this change or this feature out of the door. And by applying Team Topologies principles, they managed to reduce 60% of those dependencies. So that was their headline. 60% of dependencies were reduced through better team design. And so then they got better flow. Now it needs a reset or rethink in terms of how we do work, because one of the things that that this kind of approach implies, where we're looking to decouple, we're looking to untangle the different aspects of work. One of the things that implies is, instead of having people managing delivery by bringing together different aspects, by coordinating it, what we're looking to do is to uncoordinate. And that sounds really strange, like, well, we need to coordinate things, otherwise we're not going to get value out, or we need to bring them together. But we know now there are techniques kind of proven by software engineering, but actually equally applicable to other knowledge work domains as well. So they don't just apply to software, they can apply to things like legal services, or they apply to like marketing and accounting and a bunch of other things too. So we could apply it to quite a large part of our organization if we're substantially focused on knowledge work, or if we've got a substantial knowledge work aspect to how our organization works. We can decouple things and allow the value to emerge later. So we might have a new thing going into being live, if you like, somehow. Either it's software that's live in the environment, or a new service from the legal department that we say, well, this is now available. There might be something else that's coming down as well, that's going to be made available soon, and maybe a third thing that's going to be made available soon. Now, when those three things are all available, we get additional value out. But it's like asynchronous, and that is, it turns out that which for me, I guess, is a super obvious way of running things. It's a way that things scale. It's the way, in fact, that natural ecosystems scale. Because if natural ecosystems all waited on a different thing to be able to adapt slightly and provide a new food source or something like this, then the whole thing would be a giant mess. We wouldn't have the richness of ecosystems that we see in the world today. But you know, from a kind of traditional human perspective, and a human perspective where it was all about the control of an individual or a small group, then this kind of this almost we're almost hooked on. We're almost kind of it's like a drug, like trying to coordinate all this stuff, because it feels like a sense of control, rather than allowing things to flow independently in a decoupled fashion, so that we get that stuff out the door quickly, so we get customer outcomes improved better and more quickly, and then the value emerges over time as these different parts click together. And it's the route to, it's been proven already. There's organizations, there's huge organizations that do this at scale and have been doing this for decades. And yet it's really counterintuitive. And I guess that's a sort of slightly surprise for me, the extent to which this is really, really counterintuitive, given the opportunity in this space for significant reductions in spend, or being able to use that existing spend on much better things, be able to move much more quickly, get customer value out more quickly.
I love in this, and it'll be a theme throughout today, Matthew, in that video, the power of that visualization to unlocking it, I think, is huge, and a real skill that the people on this call, if they wanted to lean into one thing I'm passionate about, we'll see it from Lee in a minute too, is using visualization to just get started is incredible. However, here's the million-dollar question. It was all very good, all these private enterprise, highly aligned, profit motive smartest people they can hire, but would it ever work for something like government? Because we do have some government people on the call today. And here's one we prepared earlier.
So back in 2018, I worked in the UK government in what's called the Home Office department, which is about the kind of national security, so borders and passports and that kind of thing. I was the engineering lead for one of the the largest program inside that area at the time. And I was fortunate to work with some amazing people, including Dimmy, whose face is shown here on the slide. So if you watch this later, Dimmy, hi, good to see you. And one of the things that was being worked on at the time there was a move to make the software that runs the core services from this particular government department in the UK. Back in 2018 was I think all of it or most of it had already been moved to the cloud, AWS in this case, Amazon Web Services, and there was a program of work an initiative to make it clearer how different teams or services could reduce their cloud costs. And it's really, really great initiative. If you look at the bottom left image in this diagram here, you've got something which looks like, certainly in Europe, we use these kind of diagrams to show how energy efficient something is. So like if you get a fridge or a freezer or a television, you get this chart on the packaging on the back of it, and it says, oh, this is super energy efficient, it's an A grade, or it's like really inefficient down at G or F or something. And so they use this technique to help teams to improve the cost efficiency of their cloud services. Anyway, it was really great, and there's an article published online. Back in 2019, they published an article on the official government UK government blog talking about how this worked, and it was great. But what was really interesting for me, because I didn't work exactly on that program, but I literally was sitting next to those people on a daily basis. What I observed was that this initiative to make the costs of these cloud services more transparent, the effect of that was to make service owners or product owners much more interested in the boundaries of their service, like what was inside their service versus someone else's service. And the bit of work that I was involved in was actually about tagging different parts of the infrastructure so that it could be we could reconcile the costs and reconcile the activity. So from a application logging perspective, and from a infrastructure cost perspective, we could actually start to tie this stuff together. What's really interesting there is that financial transparency, clearly useful to the CFO in the organization, clearly useful. But increasing financial transparency by using modern techniques, particularly cloud, but other techniques too, can then act as a way to kind of help to better define the boundaries of particular services. That in itself then has an effect of improving flow, because if we're able to decouple one service from another service a bit better, then we're actually able to own or steward the first service better all the way through into production. So financial transparency acts a bit like a knife or a scalpel, helping to prise apart different kind of adjacent or related services for better flow. And actually what's been really interesting is to see that evolve. And in just a few weeks ago, in fact, it was published on, when was that? It was the 28th of March, 2024. So just a couple of months ago. Dimmy there, he's now in charge of, he's now a CTO in charge of data, I believe, inside that particular government part of the UK government. He published a blog post showing how they've taken that approach even further. So specifically using fast flow principles from Team Topologies and other related areas, and applying it to how they think about cloud architecture, how they think about kind of reporting, and a bunch of other things like this. So extending on those original ideas to get better approach to delivering on ministerial commitments in the UK government using these fast flow and related approaches. And that's public. There's, if you want more on this specifically from a government perspective, have a look at those 2 articles that are linked in there. They'll be in the slides when you get them later. But it's been really interesting to see it. So I can talk about it from kind of first-hand experience, like sitting next to these people doing it. I was involved in it in a very, very, very small way at the beginning. But it's also public. It's also public knowledge now, in the sense that there's those 2 blog posts that talk about it, explicitly using Team Topologies and fast flow principles to help make government services and quicker realization of ministerial commitments to policy and government services.
Well, Matthew, I imagine you're sitting nervously with your fingers crossed for July the 4th and all of that particular ministry surviving and that good work staying on. Lee, we're going across to you now, because government is complex, entangled, unpredictable, changing, but what about a bank?
Yes. So I spent a good chunk of time at one of the big banks here in Australia pretty recently, and something that we built for them was a visualization of what flow looks like for them. And so just imagine for a second, you're sitting on the 4th from the top team on the far right, and you can see all of the work that's hitting that team, and imagining what their day-to-day looks like. And the quote of the engagement, we stuck this up on the wall in an Obeya room that we built. And the quote of the engagement was a team coming in and saying, that big bowl of spaghetti is what my brain feels like when I come to work. And they're sitting there going, I'm dealing with competing priorities, a boatload of initiatives. My cognitive load is through the roof, and I'm not sure what to work on. So if I run kind of left to right through what the visualization talks about, you have your business units on the left, you have each initiative across the bank in the middle there, and there's a one-to-one relationship between business unit and initiative, which is quite good. But then it leaves and heads to the teams, and the teams are getting, like I said, conflicting initiatives from every business unit. And so we were having a chat with the head of digital, and he said that his number 1 priority was sitting at number 60 in the backlog of a team. We also did a piece of work where we started to analyze, based on the number of committed features for a quarter that the teams were committing to, how many were being completed. It ranged from anywhere from, I think, 22 to about 40%. And so we sit there and say, okay, we're in month 2 of the financial year. Your initiative is sitting at number 60 in a team's backlog. We can be really, really confident that your number 1 priority isn't going to be completed this year in month 2 of your 12-month plan, but you're going to burn upwards of $10 million on said initiative. Tremendous amount of waste, and really demoralizing for the teams as well, sitting there going, we can't even deliver on our number 1 initiative. And we have said head of, obviously quite frustrated and coming and asking us every day, when is this going to be done? How can we move this up the backlog? And we have a prioritization framework that doesn't quite allow for that. And so I think and you see it in the heading, what executives think is going on and what our prioritized backlogs look like. Once they hit the teams, they completely shift. And so again, when we think about delivering, getting stuff out the door quickly without those boundaries around that, and having a team design that is quite functional with project funding as a catalyst for how we fund our initiatives, we're really setting ourselves up for failure.
So Lee, the link to Team Topologies within this piece of work, which was a disentangling piece to get flow, and a classic flow of value. I think the board and the exec complaint was, there's not enough value coming out of this. This is your detective work. You found the entanglement. Is there a role for Team Topologies in helping untangle that somewhere?
Absolutely. And the first thing is probably through collaboration modes. So understanding which of these teams are working together, you can see really clearly highlighted here where a lot of the dependencies lie, but starting to figure out which teams are interacting with each other based on the underlying data that went into making this visual, and then starting to put boundaries around those teams and starting to say, okay, who needs to be collaborating together more closely And equally as importantly, who doesn't need to collaborate at all? How do we get out of these teams' way and actually let them deliver on the things that are important? And then again, when we go back to talk to the CFO, saying how do we actually fund these teams for success? Because a project mindset isn't setting them up to be able to do that.
Right. So, and Matthew, how does Team Topologies fix this? Wrong answers only would probably include make Cloud DP a platform team so they can rule the world. But it's this, you're talking about serious money, Lee, but Matthew, you brought it to the table, some maths in a slide that boggled our minds about what the upside is of thinking this way.
So let's just say let's say the fully weighted cost of say a person working in this kind of space, or let's say they're an engineer of some kind, software engineer or whatever, and let's say the fully loaded cost is like 160,000 euros per year. I can't do the translation in my head. What's that, about 200,000 Australian dollars? Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Let's say it's 160,000 euros. Engineer cost per day is about 600. Let's say they're blocked for 1 hour per working day, 8-hour day. And what I mean by blocked is they're actually waiting on people outside of their team for something. So they can't get access to this thing. They can't. They're waiting on an update to a particular service before they can move forward. That kind of blocked. I don't mean blocked by other. I mean there's you can talk about endless, pointless meetings and having to fill in timesheets and a whole lot of other stuff. But like I'm just talking about. Imagine they could do 7 hours of really, really useful work per day inside their team, but 1 hour per day is actually blocked because they're waiting on another team for something. That's that kind of blocked. And if you do the maths and you've got 400 engineers, that's going to set you back 8 million euros per year. Now, it's not necessarily a huge amount, but it's a useful amount of money to spend on something better, spend on customer outcomes. And if you start to scale this up and be realistically, in most organizations, most engineers or most people even doing knowledge work are blocked for more than 1 hour a day. What tends to happen is people get blocked and then they switch to something else. And so work in progress goes through the roof, goes really, really high. And we know that high work in progress is not effective. Like it actually slows things down if you're working on many, many, many things. It's counterintuitive, but if you do, it's very easy, straightforward to demonstrate. You need to be in a position where we've got a small number of things that are in progress and we've got good flow. That's how we get high throughput. And so this translates into euros or pounds or dollars or whatever very, very quickly. Like most organizations around the world working on knowledge work are likely spending millions and millions, if not billions, just spending on people waiting on other people, which is a crazy. It's kind of madness, really. And this is what flow-based approaches can help to address. But it does need us to rethink how that work works.
So Lee, back to you as a person who makes it work for our clients. You put together an amazing set of pictures of leaning into the problem and visualizing, a couple of which are mine. I'm proud to say I've had a small hand in this along the way, but obeyers and governance of all of this. How does it? Because that's going to be a chief operating officer or CFO's next question as well. Where's the governance of your new thing? I like the PMO controlling all those strands. It looked like it was under control.
Yeah, absolutely. And so something that we've done for a lot of our clients is start to build that visualization through the use of obeyer rooms. Definitely worth a Google if you're not familiar. Some really cool stuff out there. But essentially what they're designed to do is to tell the narrative of the company in a holistic view, all in one place. So if we can sit there and say, as we walk into our room, we have a really clear view of what our customers are asking for and what they want. Next to that, we have our strategy, and that strategy, there is a clear link between that and what our customers are asking for. So we have a set of outcomes, a small number of outcomes to go and deliver upon that. If we think back to the spiral, we then say, how would we know that we're delivering on those outcomes that the customers are asking for, and what are the measures that we think we need to progress? And from there, we have our portfolio of work. And so one thing that visualization does and has really helped us with and had a huge impact for our clients is to bring forth really conscious conversations and decision making, and that transparency that allows successful change, I think, because you get to see in real time what people are making decisions upon and where we're going with this. So I'll give you an example. Again, at a large bank here in Australia, we built an Obeya room. And so we had a view of customer, voice of customer, we had the bank strategy, and then we had all of their work that was currently in flight. And when we looked at their strategy, there was a whole range of things around the uplift of digital capability, or these really cool things that they wanted to invest in to add value to their customers. And then when we went to the next wall and said, here is multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of work in the form of initiatives, and I went around and tagged each one, how many of those are directly related to what you're talking about in your strategy? And over 80% of the work that I tagged was risk and compliance work. So then we can have a really conscious conversation around, okay, are we okay with the fact that our strategy says we want to do all of this for our customer, but 80% of our investment slate is actually risk and compliance work? The answer might be yes, and that's okay, but we want to have a conscious decision made around that, and then we want to communicate that to the org. So to be able to say to people, hey, the regulator's been on our back for the past 12 months, actually we need to double down on this compliance stuff, but then also going back, quarterly, monthly if possible, and saying, does this need to change? Do we need to change our allocation? And how do we not let this drag out for 3 or 4 years? Because what we saw at this particular bank is that the carry-in work, as I mentioned before, because the completion of features to commitments was so low that there was excess carry-in work every year. So you're carrying forward 20, 30, 40% of your portfolio year on year. Now you get to the end of year 2 or 3, and all we've done for the past 3 years of risk and compliance work, we're absolutely not adding any value to our customers. And over an extended period of time, that's where you start to lose market share. Within that.
Now, Lee, the answer there is you need to hire Thoughtworks at scale to help deliver all of the extra. But the answer is never that, is it? The underlying problem is deep.
It is, and it's a cultural shift as well. And the big thing that we talk about is making it about the work. So when we can start to have decision making or decisions made around what the work is doing and what the data is telling us that the work is saying, that's when we can start to solve for a lot of these problems. So the example that I would use is a really strong indicator that you're having success in your transformation is when you have teams come into the Obeya and put their hand up and say, hey, my project isn't delivering the intended value. I've spent $1 million of my $10 million allocated budget. Based on what the Obeya is telling us and the data, I actually think we should redirect this $9 million to a team outside of my realm. And you can imagine, I'm sure a lot of you are sitting there saying, I'd never do that based on the fact that I have headcount to protect, I have a job to protect, I have a budget that I need to hit. Otherwise, I won't get the money back next year. And as I mentioned before, there's teams that know in month 1 and 2 of the financial year that their work is either A, adding zero value to customers and not doing what it intended to do, or B, won't be completed, but spending that money anyway for fear of losing year. So
there's a brilliant video on YouTube of 2 dragon boat teams tug of warring against each other. It's just like an organization not rowing in the same direction around that. That is a level of maturity. And the compliance thing's interesting because it is used as an incantation to say, oh, but client compliance won't suffer for that. It's like Avada Kedavra. It's like, it's compliance. But Matthew, you've had some encounters with the world of compliance yourself.
Yeah, so we've been working with a few different organizations in financial services space in the US, in Europe, and in the UK in particular. And what's really interesting now is that we're in a situation where the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, this is the UK financial services regulator. They did some analysis a few years ago now and published a report. It's available on the internet. They published that report in 2021. And they were looking at success, things that contribute to success with IT change. So new changes to IT services getting deployed into the live environment, production environment. And they were looking at things that contribute to that success. And they found a bunch of things. They found that spending a particular portion of your budget on change rather than just run, looking at how governance was applied, effective risk management, but crucially things like frequent releases, minimum legacy infrastructure, microservices architecture, automation for environment provisioning, and agile development methodology. Now, those 5 things there are things you'd normally expect to hear coming out of, say, Thoughtworks, or maybe me talking about it, or the similar kind of organizations. This is the UK Financial Services Regulator saying, you need to adopt these kind of things. Now, these kind of practices are all relating to fast flow. And that's because we can see what they found in here. They found, overall, we found that firms that deployed smaller, more frequent releases had higher change success rates than those with longer release cycles. Firms that made effective use of agile delivery methodologies were also less likely to experience a change incident. The UK Financial Services Regulator is basically telling UK financial services regulated organizations to adopt fast flow and these kind of practices, because that's going to be more successful. Now, at the point where the financial services regulator of one of the more important, I guess it's fair to say, one of the more established and more important financial services markets in the world, is when the regulator is saying that, it's probably time to wake up and start to adopt some of these ways of working, because the regulator is indicating that they are expecting to see this inside organizations that are regulated. And even if you're not regulated by the FCA, even if you're not based in the UK, then it's a good position to adopt, to start. And to be honest, even if you're not in financial services, if the financial services regulator, which arguably should be the one that's most, interested in risk, interested in the effects of things going wrong with software and so on, if the FCA is pushing this way of operating and working because of the better outcomes it delivers, then it's a wake-up call for everyone else.
That's a great case study to tell the CFO at whatever organization you're at. I think that is a good gold standard. Now, as we come into the last slide, there's a couple of things I really, really want everyone to go away with. And we've talked about flow a lot. And I think my assessment of conversations I've had around the book, Team Topologies, which is almost 5 years old, was that it was flow of code changes. That what it was all about was lining up teams and dependencies and tagging them in different ways and streamlined to get code changes done. I don't think I've had enough conversations about flow of value, and that's where the two links between our worlds are, because it's the start of Lee's world. But so Matthew, this was kind of like the bottom line, wasn't it? This was the takeaway. Talk us through this.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair point. So the experience that my co-author Manuel Paich and I had when we were writing the Team Topologies book was very much in the technology space in terms of flow of software changes. What we've seen though is that because of the way that we wrote the book and then captured the ideas, this actually applies to flow of value more generally. Not just flow of value in software or digital services, but flow of value in pretty much any knowledge-based work. So it makes the Team Topologies idea is actually pretty fundamental when we're thinking about operating models and ways of working. And by applying these, by rethinking how we do work, by rethinking how work is funded, by rethinking how we make work visible, by rethinking how we coordinate or deliberately uncoordinate things, we can end up in this position where we're moving towards all of these things here. We're supporting this, what we call courageous customer centricity. We're really understanding what those customer needs are, what the customer value actually is, and then working backwards from that to get to a point where we've got our teams aligned, where we've got the funding aligned, so that we can get that value flowing very quickly. We shorten that time to value. I talked about financial transparency and efficiency. There's a huge amount of money being burned effectively on things being coupled together because we haven't thought about setting things up for flow. And that's what Team Topologies and related flow-based approaches can unlock, is like a step change in our effectiveness as an organization. Efficiency as well, like we're not just burning money, but our effectiveness and ability to actually to deliver value or to operate in this kind of modern business or organizational ecosystem where a huge amount of stuff is changing. We've got, the environment sadly is changing very quickly. The political situation is changing, trading relationships are changing, and these things are all connected. And so we need to expect that to only increase. And so we need to set our organizations up to be adaptive like this. And by focusing on flow, it gives us that adaptability. We end up with better decision making around compliance because we've brought things to the surface. We're not kind of stuck with multiple teams waiting on other teams all the time. We have better conversations about what it means to address compliance in an effective way, and we can do it much more quickly. And ultimately, behind all this, you tell me.
I was just going to say, Matthew, so this is my headline. This, as a social scientist, this last one is the one for me. And it's sort of like, it's an awkward one because I feel this pressure of, is Team Topologies woke? Humane organizations. Why is it so central for you? Because you're a former engineer coming from the constrained, predictable, testable, consistent world to a world where you are saying loosely constrained, humanistic. You've landed so heavily on humane organizations as a key theme, and I'm curious as to why.
So actually, we did some archaeology, my co-author and I, and went back into the underlying principles around Team Topologies. And one of the things that actually popped out for us, we had to remind ourselves basically, is that we wanted to make things more humane. We wanted to make things easier for people inside organizations to understand their purpose and like how they fit in and how they can contribute better, because we saw so many people really struggling with like not understanding how they can actually make a useful difference. And that's part of the reason why we've got different kind of teams and different kind of team interaction modes and different language and things like that, and a focus on team cognitive load in the Team Topologies book. But realistically, you can argue that making organizations more humane is actually just a hard-nosed business driver, because inhumane organizations, and many organizations these days are not particularly humane at the very least, where people are working on things which they know are going to be thrown away, or they're just not valuable, or their contribution is not being valued. They can't contribute in the way that they know they can because the team is not empowered, and so on and so on. So actually, a move towards making organizations more humane ends up being more effective. We're able to use the intelligence of the people at the team level to be able to make better decisions more quickly, to be able to meet customer needs more quickly. Is actually, at one level, a kind of hard-nosed, organizational or business. We can look at the hard-nosed business outcomes in terms of faster flow of value, in terms of more engaged employees and staff, in terms of better retention, so reduced churn, and we're leaning on the intelligence and awareness of people across the organization to be able to detect when things are not working. And so instead of having a hugely costly, very long cycle of, oh, we need to do a big reorg because things aren't working, we can continuously tweak the shape of our organization because people are engaged. It's actually a more effective way of running the organization. Yeah, turning into something that's much more living rather than something which is just like a machine.
Well, I'm watching my clock, and here in Aotearoa, it's a few minutes to go. Lee, I didn't get an answer to a question I know we had on the books. I don't think so. What exactly is the difference between a customer outcome and a business outcome? Like, define that for me.
Yeah, it is. And I think it kind of goes into what Matt just said around humane organizations and being able to give people the opportunity to deliver on real value. I think the best example that I can give, and it's a banking example, is that you have a business outcome that is internally focused that says increase the sale of mortgages by X%. And if we follow the spiral, the work that we would design to move that needle would be set aside here. That would be one thing. Versus a customer outcome that says, help put me into a home, the work that we would design to actually move the needle on that outcome would be significantly different to that of an internally focused outcome. And there's two sides to it. There's the one side that Matt talks about, which is you're empowering people to go and actually add value to other people. And if you just go and ask a banker, how many mortgages did you sell this week, this month, versus asking them how many people did you put into a home, the reaction when they tell you the answer is probably enough to tell you how they feel about their job. But more importantly to the business, it is that work that flows out of it when you follow through the simplified operating model. And when you think about the work that you would do to put somebody into a home, as a home buyer, I want to know, for one, where do I actually want to live? What does the area look like? What is my personal situation? Where does that fit into this this decision? How much can I afford to borrow? From there, what actually goes into buying the home? What do I have to know about? Because I've never bought a home before. And then if you think about the customer journey and you think about all of the steps that you would go through to put somebody into a home, you can start to dive in and say, where on this customer value or this customer journey map, can I actually add some value, and where can my organization fit in and start to monetize this, versus you almost capping yourself when you say, let's sell more mortgages. And so I think the uncapped potential in a customer outcome should be enough for business leaders to really drive towards that. Because like I said, when you put a business outcome in place that says increase mortgages by X%, you're capping yourself at that, because people are only going to strive for that 5, 10, 15% increase. And the skills and capabilities that you need to go and progress that versus the customer outcome, again, are completely different. And it changes the dynamic of your organization.
Lee, we're going to have a chat about the psychological impact of a young person saying, put someone in a home. For a fellow like me at 60, it's quite a different thing. You need another word there, mate. That's not working for me. Okay, it's been an hour of power. I think if I had one thing I'd encourage people to do is please read Team Topologies, the book. Read it all the way through. It's not like an American book where it's two chapters and then lunch and sausage in the last half. Good all the way through. But Matthew, if I'm not giving away too large a secret, I think you're plotting another edition, aren't you?
Yeah, so we've spoken to the publisher, IT Evolution, and their amazing editorial team under working with Gene Kim, and yes, we've got thumbs up for another book that kind of follows on from Team Topologies. We've not actually started work on it yet, but almost certainly it will be looking at applying Team Topologies at different scales, so small, medium, large, and outside of IT as well. So in the software space that we've already talked about, but also in other areas too, like legal, accounting, marketing, finance, and a bunch of other places. Research and development is one that we came across recently, where we are very pleased to see that the Team Topologies ideas actually are working well in there. Even beyond that, applying Team Topologies to things like rollout and management, renewal of critical national infrastructure, which is kind of amazing to see. So physical infrastructure as well. So there's no date yet for the next Team Topologies book, but that's stuff we're working on at the moment, and it's been really interesting to see how these ideas are applied well outside of the original kind of IT and software context.
So very good. To wrap it up, this webinar has been brought to you by the principle that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Two very useful ones today, and you've seen a bit about how we weave them together at Thoughtworks. You've seen Team Topologies' commitment to making this work in the Australasian region, with Luke joining Matthew, and Matthew's promise he's coming to Australia next year. There's actually a workshop coming up with the Agile PMs, and if you're lucky enough to be in Melbourne, the Agile and Domain-Driven Design meetup tomorrow evening. You Google that or contact Luke on LinkedIn. You can find out more about that. And if you want to know more about operating models, talk to Lee. There's your things on screen. And just thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. And we'll see you all very soon.